Araya, great to see you today. Thank you so much for making time for the conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I'm excited.
awesome. Yeah, me too. And
Hmm.
the work that you do is so important as a midwife. And this is the first interview that we've done on State of Water with a midwife. And
Cool.
yeah, so I'm excited to hear your perspective, but I thought it'd be cool to start out with just a little bit about your personal history, your own story growing up on Lake Superior and your relationship with the
Hmm.
water.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool.
Um, yeah, Lake Superior's my favorite topic probably ever. I grew up in the Eastern UP on Lake Superior and had an idea that I would literally never leave the UP. I was like, why would I ever need to leave? Like,
Yeah.
I love Lake Superior so much that I didn't really care about the rest of the world. And then learning about like climate change, and this was like in the era of people talking a lot about peak oil and how that relates to travel and all that stuff. I was like, cool, I'll just hunker down here and read about the rest of the world, pretty much. Very Youper mentality. I think a lot of Youpers never leave the UP because, you know, why would you? It's so great up there. Like we never travel, we did some traveling as when I was a kid, but going below the bridge was like a low priority for us. And so I actually never swam in Lake Michigan until I moved here in 2018.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
Lake Michigan was never really on my radar. It was all about Lake Superior. So spent a lot of time kayaking, hiking, swimming, all season swimmer. I started that as a young age of like breaking ice and trying to do cold dips, and
Oh, wow.
um, always wanted to be on our calendar, our family calendar. We would always like write the first swim of the year, and I always wanted to be the first person. So there's a bunch of like stuff in my parents' garage that's like Araya's first swim, like 1/1 2005, and it's just yeah, it's really funny.
Wow.
So yeah, and then I lived in Marquette for quite a few years. I was going to school there and then dropped out to become a farmer. And that's sort of when out of hospital midwifery came on my radar. I grew up in a really big family. I always knew I wanted to work in midwifery or in obstetrics. I thought I wanted to be an OB at first.
Mhm.
And then I thought I wanted to be a nurse midwife. And then after starting nursing school, I was like, oh, yeah, no, I don't actually want to be in this system at all. Like, it doesn't align with who I am as a person and how I'm living my life right now. And so um, I just started learning more about out of hospital midwifery, home birth, and that's kind of that was sort of my catalyst um, into that world. And um, I found a school on the West Coast that I decided to go to, and that was me like taking this very big leap and saying, okay, like I'm gonna leave, and always knowing I was gonna come back, like always having the idea that my practice name would be Two Hearted Midwifery, which it did end up being because I grew up near the Two Hearted River
Mhm.
and was just so in love with that. Like any river meeting Lake Superior was a really was an experience for me my whole life. I just always gravitated towards those like confluences, I guess,
Mhm.
um, where the river and the lake would meet. And yeah, so I took that with me to the West Coast and cried about missing Lake Superior pretty much every every day for the
Mhm.
5 years that I lived out there. Um, because it was, yeah, it's just such a big part of my heart. And um, I always knew I would return. And it was interesting being out there. Like people who are not from around here do not understand what it's like to grow up on a Great Lake. Like
Mm.
they think like cornfields and like a Midwest. And I was like, I'm not from the Midwest. I'm from the UP. Like I'm from Lake Superior. So when people would say like, where are you from? I'm like, ever heard of Lake Superior? Like that's my homeland.
Mhm.
Like I can see Canada. That's the end of UP that we lived on, so
Mhm.
it was, I felt like I was a ambassador for the Great Lakes when I was out on the West Coast.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, that was really fun to teach people about our water and yeah, what was going on over here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So your journey becoming a midwife, I can't help but think about, I mean, water is life is a common phrase that people
Hmm.
hear. And obviously, birth is life. And there is some of this idea of like, water being this purely benevolent force, which it is, it's life giving. But there's also an
Yes.
intensity to it that you experienced
Hmm.
growing up, the winters on the shore of Lake Superior, the
Yes.
intensity of like being a young person going in ice cold water. And,
Right.
um, and there's an intensity to birth. You're
Yeah.
you're the bridge between worlds in some ways, a guide for people through the most intense and meaningful experience of their lives, oftentimes. And I have so much respect for midwifery, and there's a sense of awe that I have, and it's something that kind of happens kind of under the radar of mainstream society. Like
Hmm.
midwives are working sort of like day and night and just sort of tapping in and out of everyday life. Like I could see you in the grocery store not knowing that you just came from a birth or you're about to go to a birth.
Right. I might not know I'm about to go to a birth also, which is like one of the harder parts is the spontaneity of all that. I remember when I first started doing birth work and it was in 2012 and I would literally go to the grocery store and I would look at people like, you don't know what I just saw. Like this intensity of like, you have no idea what's going on right now. Like after just witnessing something really intense. And now, like after doing it for so long, it's not like it doesn't overwhelm me in that same way. And
Mm,
that is kind of like my relationship with Lake Superior. Like, I mean, I will take her as in any form that she
mm,
is. Like I'm not afraid. I mean, I have very healthy respect for birth in Lake Superior
mm,
and, obviously have a lot of safety nets in place. But I will take them both however they come. And my mom always would say that Lake Superior's a bitch. She would be like, she's a witch,
mhm,
she's really angry. And I would be like, I don't know if she's angry. Like, I'm not gonna put like a negative, it's not negative to me. It just is. It's just like
yeah.
it's just who she is in that moment. And that's okay. And in birth, you learn to be very okay with whatever is happening, in like the emotional holding space sense. Like, obviously, as a midwife, I have tons of training and lots of experience on actually like doing things when things need to happen, like handling emergencies, administering medications,
Mm,
doing that sort of the more medical things. But a lot of what I do is just going, yeah, that's really intense.
mm,
It's really scary. You're feeling really like this is really big
mm,
and that's okay. And talking to people prenatally, like you are going to feel like this isn't right. There's no way that this would be right because in my body it feels wrong. It feels because it's pain or just this intensity that feels like you can't handle it, but it's actually exactly what you need to be doing. That's
mm,
exactly what brings your baby. And a lot of people settle into that and they understand that whether you can like, articulate it or not, like you see that in people that they're like, there's a lot of reckoning because labor is very mental also, where you're just like going back and forth, like, my gosh, I don't know if I can do this. Like you're constantly on the edge of that in labor. Most people are.
mm,
And yeah, you just have to have a lot of trust that you can do it. You are doing it. And that's saying that a lot of midwives or people in the birth world, like it's not bigger than you because it is you. Like you can get through this experience because you are this experience. This is your body. It's not like a outside force that's making these contractions, which we also call waves pretty frequently.
Mm.
Like nobody is making this happen but you and your body and your baby. And so like your body doesn't do that. Your body, you can adapt to this. You can get through it.
Beautiful. Wow. And so can you talk a little bit more about kind of your discernment and your intuition in finding your path? So you knew you wanted to be working in the world of birth, and how did you step into what you're doing now on the level that you're doing it?
Yeah, naively. I feel like everyone, until you're doing birth work, you're like, oh my God, birth is amazing. Birth works. Like all these very true and positive affirmations, like, which is, leads people into this work of like being in awe and feeling really inspired. And like, I sort of in like the climate change, the community that I was in, Marquette, was very like, what are you going to be doing when, like, for our community? Like, what is your role? And I
Yeah.
was like, I'm gonna be the midwife. That makes sense. Like, I had already been feeling like I wanted to be doing that kind of work, and I was like, yeah, that's something I feel capable of. I'd been interested since I was a very young child. Like as a 10-year-old, I was volunteering for breastfeeding support groups because I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like
Wow.
breastfeeding, birth. I just was like obsessed, totally loved that whole realm. Um, and so it felt like, okay, this is how I will contribute to like healing our community and helping our community or whatever community I'm in. And yeah, and then of course, like actually doing the work, like it's always nice to think like these really great things about what you're doing. And I have moments of like, okay, I'm doing great work. And it's also extremely hard.
Mhm.
And yeah, but it's worth it.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So your business is called Two Hearted Midwifery, inspired by
Mm-hmm.
the river,
Yeah,
and of course the
it's one of
mother
my
child.
favorite. Yes. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really beautiful. It's such a
Mm-hmm.
cool. It's a great name for any midwifery practice, but I love how it
Mm-hmm.
connects to your personal mythology. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
I had always, when I was gonna come back to Michigan, I thought I was gonna go back to the UP.
yeah.
So I was like, oh, this will be like perfect. And then obviously I made a pit stop that has been like a long-term pit stop here in northern Michigan on Lake Michigan. So
Mm.
but I was like, I'm not gonna like this is just who I am, and this is such a huge part of what I believe. And so I don't know anything about I didn't know anything about the Lower Peninsula. So I wasn't gonna be like change my whole practice name because of that.
Yeah,
Just fine. And now I know a lot more about down here, but I
yeah.
came in pretty blind.
So
Yeah.
how's your relationship with Lake Michigan these days?
It's so good.
Mm.
It's so good. It's yeah, I think I just definitely fell in love, like it like Lake Superior is like the grandmother of the Great Lakes in my mind. She's dark, she's wild, she's unpredictable, like there's just so much intensity, and she's just so old, like that deep water, that cold water, that glacial water just feels like so ancient and old. And I know all the Great Lakes were made of the same water, but when I moved down here, Lake Michigan felt so tame compared to Lake Superior, and so much more like, well, I'm just a sweet mother. I'm just like a mama. Like, I'm going to cradle you in this way that is much more gentle and sweet. I mean, I feel cradled by Lake Superior, but in like a tough love kind of way sometimes, because she is so big and intense, and I can't hide from I can't hide from her. I can't hide from her at all. And Lake Michigan is just more like mellow and, yeah, accepting. So I love Lake Michigan. We're good pals these days.
Yeah, good.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear a little bit from you about the way that water plays into your work. Just like reflecting on, lessons from water, and and I know that some people choose to have water births. Obviously, water breaking is a very significant moment in the birthing process.
Yes.
Yeah. So just, how does that show up for you, and your like lifelong relationship with water as well, being a factor in the work that you do?
Well, the end of pregnancy is a very watery time. Physically, like mucus, breast, leaking from your breast, crying a lot. Like the late pregnancy, birth, and immediate postpartum time is like water everywhere. It's very, very, very fluid time. And that's how I talk to people about it. And people really resonate with that, because they're like, yeah, I just feel like no boundaries, and so that's why a lot of people, right before they give birth, they really need to just like go into a cave and not isolate, but just like really turn inward, because they are affected by what's happening. And that's a labor too. Like labor is affected by, like, if you throw a stone and the water ripples, that can happen with a labor too. Like, obviously I do out of hospital birth, but I see it a lot when people choose hospital births. It's like interventions are disrupting this natural flow of a labor, which is not it's not a river that's like going one direction. There's a lot of little fingers that come off of this river, and a lot of start and stop, and a lot of a lot of just a lot of different directions. It's just kind of a saturated experience, instead of like we're going in one direction the whole time. And some labors are like that, certainly, especially a second labor, someone who's had a couple kids, like they get on the train and they have their baby. Like it can be a very like boom kind of experience. But a lot of them is just like moving slowly into that experience. And yeah, it's very, very watery.
Yeah.
Some people choose to give birth in the water. A lot of people use water as a coping mechanism. So whether in the shower or in the tub, just like that comfort that it brings people, a pool of warm water when you're feeling like you're dying can be like a little reprieve. And it also, what I see is it acts like, as well, it's literally a container, but it contains people so that they can kind of like get right with themselves, reckon with where they are in the birthing process. So if things are really intense, it might be like, let's put you in the tub. Let's try and slow things down. Let's try and give you a minute to collect yourself and meet your baby.
Wow.
Yeah.
And postpartum as well, very watery.
Oh my gosh. Sweat, breast milk, blood, all of those things, tears.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a baby a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And in the postpartum, I remember every time I would nurse, which was, every 5 seconds, I would like sweat from my kneecaps. I'm like, I didn't know you could sweat from your shins, from the top of your feet. Just the amount of like from every part of your body. You're like, what? Why are my toes sweating right now? It's just, yeah, everything starts flowing. Like when one thing starts flowing, everything else starts flowing.
Mm.
So that letdown happens. You're feeding your baby, you start sweating. Your uterus is contracting because as you nurse, it helps clamp your uterus down. So you might have a gush of blood. And then a lot of people cry in those first couple of days, especially when they're nursing.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of hormones going on. A lot of, just a lot. Just a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. You feel really thirsty, like this unquenchable thirst. Like as soon as the baby latches on, you're like, give me an ocean. Well, give me a great lake to suck down right now because dang, I'm so thirsty.
Yeah, that makes sense. You
Mhm.
lose all those fluids
Totally.
such a short amount of time, and here's this
Yeah.
that needs you.
Yeah.
So
It's
this
like constantly replenishing.
constantly, yeah.
Mhm.
Forgive me if this has been a big topic in your life in the last couple of years, but as a midwife who's helped a lot of people with birth before your own birth, what was it
Mhm.
like for you to, shift roles from being a guide for others to being the one giving birth, and who did you work with?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, my God, everybody has asked me that question, especially when I was pregnant.
Yeah.
And I was like, not a midwife. I was a mom, 100%. Like I,
You
I'd
weren't
be like,
thinking about
I,
midwifery
and
stuff.
I was really worried about that. I was like, I'm gonna worry about all these complications, all the like crazy things I've seen. I'm gonna worry that's me. And I was like, no, I couldn't form a thought for myself, even
Mm,
though I attended births until I was like 7 or 8 months pregnant. And so I would sit down and have like conversation with the client. They'd be like, "Oh, I have this terrible heartburn," and I'd be like, "Here's all these things to do." And then I'd be like suffering with heartburn. I'd be like, "I don't know, what should I do?" And I'd call my midwife, who is my best friend, Britt,
mm,
and she'd be like, "All of these things." I'm like, "Thank you for telling me that, because there's no way, like, you can't midwife yourself. It just doesn't work like that. Like, you need someone to guide you through that."
mhm.
And even though I had been to hundreds of births, when labor actually started for me, I was like, in my mind, I was like, nobody told me it was going to be like this.
Mm,
Nobody, I remember looking at my midwife. So I had Britt and I had Katie Hobbs as my midwife and then amazing doula, Kristen.
mm,
And I looked at all of them and I was like, you guys who I'd attended births with, all of these women.
mm.
And I was like, nobody prepared me. Nobody told me. And I was kind of like an angry birther. I was just like, this is this is BS. This is so hard.
Mm.
This is so much harder than I could have ever imagined. And I need to take it out on you a little bit.
Mhm.
So I was extremely unprepared because
Mm.
you actually can't prepare for an experience like that. There's nothing you can, like it in it to. There's nothing that you can compare it to. And so it's a lot. It's really big and it's really intense. And um I was never worried. I was feeling it all. I was not in my mind. I was not in my head thinking, "Ooh, is this about to happen? Is that about to happen?" No, I was just getting pummeled by the waves, pretty
Oh,
much,
yeah.
getting thrown around. Yeah.
Mm.
It was,
And your partner, your wife, Amy,
mhm.
is a hospice worker. And
Yeah.
so that's a really fascinating combo to have a midwife and
Mhm.
a hospice worker in the same household. Do you unpack with each other? Are there some like really similar experiences that you both go through?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Like, you know, it's a midwifery or life and death. We try not to be that heavy in our house, but we have moments where we're like, oh my God, listen to this, like this is so similar. Like this death happened and the way the family reacted. It's like family dynamics, actual physical things that are happening to people when they're birthing and dying, are eerily similar. And the way that we care for them is very similar. Like in hospice, it's a lot of that is being present with people in their pain, and you're not actually there to, you're there to make them comfortable, but you're not there to fix anything. You're not there to treat them so they won't die. You're there to just be like, okay, yes, you are dying, and I'm going to be here with you and try and make this as comfortable as possible, which is basically what a midwife does. People are like, this is terrible. And I go, yeah, it's terrible. And I'm here for you. And we're all here for you. And you are the only one that can do this right now. And that sucks. And I think that's, we say the same sorts of things as far as just acknowledging and holding space for people in that legitimate suffering.
Yeah.
There's no way to get around that. Like, that is not to scare people, obviously, but it's a lot. It's very intense and it's hard, and it's okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Beautiful. Let's talk about like preparing for a birth. Do you have like go-to musical artists that you listen to when you're driving to?
Ooh.
What's your preparation? How do you get into the
Oh my gosh. Well, it depends on the time of day and how far away it is. Man, there was one winter a couple of years ago that I was listening to. I listen to like sad, folky music a lot of the times on the way to a birth. Like, let me just cry a little bit. Let me just like get in my feels.
Get raw.
So get raw. Just like make it hurt a little. That's kind of my what was that?
Like Nick Drake, Elliott Smith.
Like, yeah, sure. Nick Drake, sure. Yeah, a little bit of that. Like Joni Mitchell, like Adrienne Lenker. I'm obsessed with her.
Yes.
Obsessed. Like, there's this band called Lomelda, I think it's called. I'll send it to you. Oh, it hurt. So good. Like Patty Grisham, just like,
yes.
Like take me out and just make me feel this.
Yes.
So it's either that or like, I mean, I've like driven feverishly to births in snowstorms listening to like NPR jazz on full blast, or like funk, I'm like, whatever. So
yeah,
those are kind of the things. Yeah. And then often when I'm going to a birth, it's like, I'm kind of imagining the client and doing drills in my mind of like emergency. It's like, okay, like making sure that I'm thinking about my protocols at that time also.
Yeah.
In a very logistical way. Like, okay, remember how to treat a hemorrhage, remember how to resolve a shoulder dystocia. Let me drill some neonatal resuscitation in my brain. Yeah. I have some songs that I sing that are that I've been singing since I started going to births, that are just like reminders for me to breathe and not just think of it as a job. Think of it like I'm going to someone's house and they're going to be welcoming a baby, and it's a really big deal, which, I've that's easy for me to like really see the sacredness in it. And even more so after I gave birth, because every time since then that I go to a birth, I'm like, oh my God, I get to be that person for someone else that someone was for me.
Yeah.
And that was life-changing to have people show up for me and hold me in my agony and my joy and my in my birth, just in that, those huge feelings. And then I get to do that for someone else. Just feels like I am repaying back, the universe in some way for that experience that my midwives gave me, which, we always say, like, I'm just there, right? I'm there as a safety net. You did all the work. You birthed your baby. I don't deliver babies. You birth your baby. And having someone in your corner allows you, so having someone with that safety net allows you to be able to birth your baby in the way that you feel safe and held and seen. And that's not everyone's experience. Obviously, some people free birth and don't want anyone there. And I can understand that. But for a lot of people, it's, we've been doing this forever. We've always been attending births. There's always been midwives. And that's a special thing to get to witness for people.
Absolutely. Yeah. Our midwife, Kathy Mulder, who you know very well, it's a lifelong connection, and that gratitude extends through my whole life too. Just that she provided support on that level in that space. It means so much, and it takes a really rare and special kind of person to be able to choose the line of work that you're in and to hold that intensity and that level of care in that space. And another question I have for you is, does the experience of the adrenaline of it wear off the more births you go to? And like, how do you recover after a birth? Maybe like an especially long and intense birth.
Yeah. I mean, there's always adrenaline because it's unpredictable. Like, you don't know, like, you're in your mind being present with what's unfolding in front of you, and also needing to be on in a way of like, okay, I'm seeing this sign. Let me start preparing for this thing that might be happening. And so that's where, like, the adrenaline would come in, the first, like, when I was a baby doula, the first several births that I went to, I'd be like, I cannot do this. I can't believe I thought I wanted to do this. This is so intense. I can't, like, I'm going to freak out. I'm going to throw up.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And
I bet.
And, now obviously that would be a very bad thing if that's how I felt now, but that wears off quickly because it becomes familiar. You're like, okay, this is it. I know what to expect in some ways. And I'm just going to be here for whatever happens. And, there are those moments, like, especially during complications, where I have this moment, like, I can feel myself somewhere back here watching what I'm doing. And I'm like, you are the one that needs to do this right now. And that can feel really intense, to be like, all this pressure is actually on you to help with this complication. And there's no adrenaline. It's almost like a peace in that moment where you're just like there's no other, I've never been so present in my whole life than in those moments where it's like, do the thing in front of you, because that's what needs to happen. So, mostly births are fun for me to attend, and I don't cry anymore, not because I don't think it's beautiful, but because it's also, like, so normal.
Yeah.
And it's been so normalized for me. And I think that's a really good thing. And I think it should just be like, we should take it as a holy event, because it is. And it's just like, it happens every day.
Yeah.
Like, this is amazing. And you're just an animal. You're just a person who just, like, birthed their baby. And that's sort of boring and sort of extraordinary. you know?
Yeah. It's nature. It's completely natural
Yeah.
and completely extraordinary.
Yeah. It's both and
Mhm.
all the time.
Wow.
And then as far as like recovering, eating carbs and sleeping if I can, which has been harder having a kid of my own,
Right.
going home and then having a baby that's like, well, she's not a baby anymore, but when she was a baby, who wanted to then nurse for like 12 hours straight. And I'd be like, I'm going to die right here.
Oh,
I'm so tired.
I bet.
So
That
I don't
sounds
know. Everyone,
so intense. Yeah. And
yeah.
as a toddler, it's probably
Hmm.
really challenging. She's wild
Right.
climbing now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's a wild little one. She's really obsessed with the snowplow right now. So anytime like she hears like a loud car, she's like, and she runs to the window and scales the window and is like face up, trying to catch a glimpse of the snowplow.
Everything's so new.
Yeah.
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 Wow. Well, anything else you would like to share just about how water is showing up in your world these days, Araya?
I mean, no, I'm drinking some water right now.
Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers. Clink.
Well, thank you so much for
About
the work
right.
that you do, and I hope that the winter is kind to you in the important mobility that you need to have to get to the births and to get home safely.
Yes. Thank
Blessings.
you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And
Yeah.
I am such a fan of yours and grateful for the work that you do, and thankful that you took some time to share about your life and your world, and blessings to Mother Superior and
Seriously, my
all of you.
girl.
Yeah. Grandmother Superior.
Grandmother superior. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Ancient, dark, wise grandmother.
Yeah. She's
Yeah.
starting to freeze a little bit right now, which is
Okay.
very cool. That's what my parents are reporting.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so
Yeah.
much and keep up the good work.
Yeah. Thanks, Seth.
Mhm.